Moving right along to our next fireside chat. Obviously, Crocs does not need an introduction, but you might be surprised to learn that they're laser focused on digital innovation. Really a powerhouse behind some of the most innovative e-commerce strategies out there, mastered at translating complex tech into amazing customer experiences. So we're really excited to have with us today Senior Vice President of Digital Technology, Experience and Insights at Crocs, Feliz Papich. And the chat will be moderated by our very own VP of Customer Success, Roxana Karuna Rotne. I got it, right? Okay, Rox and Feliz, come on up.
That was fantastic. Great pronunciation. Thank you. Guys, I could not think of a better way to follow Volvo and kick off day 2 by getting to sit down with one of the most dynamic leaders in digital today. Feliz Papich is the SVP of Digital Experience Technology and Insights at Crocs. Over the course of her career, she's built an incredible track record, leading brands, leading teams in digital merchandising, product management, content strategy at brands like Decker and Merkle. Today, she's helping shape the future of one of the most bold and beloved brands in retail and fashion. At Crocs, Feliz is leading digital transformative initiatives, helping the brand stay agile, stay personalized, and stay connected to the culture like never before. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for sitting down with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Shall we get started? Okay, so you started at Crocs in 2019, which feels like a lifetime ago in digital years. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the biggest retail shifts that you've seen since you've started 6 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest one that always sticks with me is kind of COVID itself, right, and what it did to the digital landscape. I think we all kind of knew, for those of us that have been in the environment in the digital, that it was always coming, but I think it just took this major acceleration at that point, and it kind of hasn't stopped, right? You kind of see the consumer move to digital. They have never really gone back. I think there's still kind of this critical moment that they're experiencing as consumers. So I think for us, we saw that opportunity as like this moment just to kind of seize the brand momentum, seize the conversation, take advantage of like the nimble environment that we had in digital. And then I think right now what we're seeing is social commerce. And so I think like social commerce isn't net new, but TikTok is new, right? And consumers' behavior on TikTok is incredibly important to every brand. And we kind of moved quickly into that space almost a year ago, which is crazy. And we're seeing the consumer just really gravitate towards things we've been trying to push for years, like sandals. All of a sudden, consumers know we make sandals, and it's because of that environment. So I think you kind of see all these shifts in that world, and then it really comes down to being nimble and being able to personalize in all of these experiences, and not just think of that as .com. Think of that as everywhere you are in digital and how you kind of connect it together and make it easy as a tech partner for your digital teams and your consumer and commercial teams to execute on it.
So to be that agile, that's not easy either. So I guess fast forward to today, a lot of folks in the crowd are building their future state architecture right now.
Yes.
So what kind of big rocks did you have to move to kind of start beginning to lay the foundation for like the next gen digital experience at Crocs?
Yeah, I think, I'm sure all of you experienced that when you talk about composable, you talk about digital evolution. Some people's eyes glaze over if they're not in the technical environment, and it feels scary. It feels big, it feels risky, it feels like the word transformation in itself, I think. Daunting, right? So I think what we did is take it a piece at a time. So Contentstack honestly was a big moment for us in our journey. We just said we were gonna have a composable and headless CMS. And we moved it over little by little, and we kind of honestly just finished that migration in totality. So it was kind of this moment of just iteratively moving, and then moving the code to React, and then kind of taking steps that people don't require you. Nothing's worse than like crowdsourcing a project, right? So we kind of removed that step of approvals and risk and scarcity with the team, and just kind of moved them in the journey. And then I think you start to just make everything easier once you start to do just little pieces at a time. So then your team has this autonomy to move, and create personal journeys, use more of every composable option that you've brought to the table. And then we brought like Algolia to the table, and we kind of just have moved iteratively without requiring executive level approval.
So modernizing by milestone.
Yeah.
Chipping away at it. So on the topic of innovation, I think everyone in the crowd is probably dying to know, where has AI created meaningful value for you at Crocs? And could you give us an example of a use case that has made your team faster, smarter, or more connected to the consumer?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice, I would think about it in 3 components. I would use your partners. So if you're a brand and you want to get into AI, I guarantee all your vendor partners have those options. They have AI they're moving into, they're experimenting with it. You already have this integration, you already have it moving, so lean into kind of that moment with them and leverage what they're doing. Work with their beta programs, lean into what they're launching. The other portion is really finding those easy components of AI that don't require change management. And one of those I think of is content creation, right? So you think about how that can be sped up in all these ways that you don't think of that aren't huge. It's like paid social, it's your email, it's your site, all of these things that you can kind of iterate and create 45 different experiences within your environment, and it's easy, and it's something that's you can modify as long as you're within like your brand guidelines. And then the other one is like thinking about the big stuff, right? Like where do you really leverage agents? Where do you leverage kind of those components to make efficiency and reduce the work that you don't want your team working on, right? There's so much that you're like, you want your team working on the big stuff. You want them working on the areas they're interested in, and if they're doing monotonous tasks, then you're taking away from what you can get out of that team.
So focus on really efficiency at first, and then also take advantage of the different capabilities that your partners and vendors offer.
Yeah.
Shameless plug for Brand Kit via Contentstack. Yeah. Okay, so you talked a little bit about change management.
Yep.
I feel like everyone's talking about that right now. Bringing content, dev, data teams, web teams together into alignment is not easy.
No.
But it's almost critical to deliver personalization at scale, or even start to think about personalization at scale. How do you encourage that level of collaboration? How do you make sure that you're keeping your teams in sync and focused on the voice of the customer?
Yeah, I think it really comes down, and this is going to be, nothing net new, right? Is that prioritization for a team is incredibly important. And if they all feel like they understand the priority and they understand how they're all getting there, and if something changes, which it will, especially right now in this environment, it will change every single day. But if they understand why it's changing and they're all aligned to the same prioritization, they're all moving towards the same goal. And at the end of the day, most of us are accountable to our consumer because they're what drives the bottom line, they're what drives demand. And so if you make sure you're actually taking that data, everybody knows it, down to your developers, your operations, your commercial teams, and they all feel in sync with where they're going, you're gonna get them more on board and you're gonna move faster because you don't have to catch people up if you are too far along without them.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. We have talked a lot in the last kind of 24 hours about the brand relevancy crisis, just how hard it is to continue to stay top of mind with your customer, given there's so much noise in the market. How do you navigate that challenge? And how do you also overcome the fact that there's such a big need for content at scale and agility?
Yeah.
How are you focusing on that?
Yeah, I think for us, we think about it is you really have to move incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And so if there's an opportunity, you have to lean into it, and you have to think of your whole ecosystem. So again, we think of TikTok Shop as the same as our .com. We see them as like slightly different communication channels to the consumer, but we should be plugged in from a content perspective, a personalization perspective, all of these things to all of our digital ecosystems across all marketplaces, .com, retail, and we have to kind of move with the conversation with them. So the minute we see something pick up, we are there and we're gonna move with it and take that opportunity with the consumer. So it's really very much of like, everything's an opportunity, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right?
When you take like stock in your mind of all the projects that you guys have worked on, if you focus on like the last 6 months, Can you think of a favorite project, a digital initiative project that you've worked on? And I'm curious, what outcome did that drive for the business?
Yeah. I think for us, which I should have worn them, we have these gibbets charms.
Guys, can you see this? These are Crocs that are heeled.
Yes.
I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, and so we have these charms that enable personalization, right, in a different form, in a physical form. And we really wanted to bring that to life. We wanted to leverage it in a moment in which we could have fun. Our consumers really fun. And so we kind of wanted to put this, we have this gamification in which they can almost, move their gibbet through a land and then win a discount and move them through. So we had this, and it came to life incredibly quickly from something we saw on social. We brought it to life on the app. And it was kind of this moment where we could personalize it to people we knew had a clog in their cart, and we could make that change and show them the game. So this is kind of this great moment for us to really have this non-commercial aspect brought to life that became commercial.
And you said quickly. How quickly from inception to release?
3 weeks.
Wow.
So lucky I have a very talented team, so that plays a lot to it.
That's incredible. I guess that's a nice segue into experimentation.
Yeah.
Which a lot of folks that are in teams that you support are talking about.
Yeah.
How often do you expect to get it right? And then how do you know when you got it right?
Yeah, I think, A/B testing should just be like a muscle, right? It should always just be something your teams automatically, they should all know how to use the tool, which, I think tools that are easy to use that any business member, an on-site person, doesn't need a developer to get there.
Yeah.
I think you have to just try everything, especially in an unknown environment where offense is just as important as defense. You have to come to market and just test it and bring it to life. So, we thought we were gonna change the whole dynamic of our gibbets personalization with an AR feature, because everybody talks about AR,
fun.
right? You're like, oh, this is gonna be great. And then you find that the consumer can't engage at that level of intensity with you, right? Having 800 gibbets and an AR feature and placing them. But we learned a lot how to adapt that experience through A/B testing, through experimentation. And you kind of take away what you can out of it, even though it didn't work and we really wanted it to work. There's other aspects to kind of evolve as you learn that stuff.
Sure, and then if you think about experimentation with content, are there any content strategies or tactics that you're focusing on right now that you could share or inspire the crowd with?
Yeah, I think, when you think about content, you think about personalization, it can be this massive hurdle. Again, as you think of Composable and that journey, if you approach it little by little and you think about what the use case is, again, if you already have a tool in place that you can leverage, that makes it easier to think of smaller use cases. And you start to build those use cases, and then the team becomes familiar with how to do it. So something we do is different product areas for us, right? Sandals and a clog shopper is a very different shopper. A shopper who's coming back is very different than a first-time visitor. So all of those, we try and manipulate the experience for the consumer and really drive. And it doesn't have to be huge. It can be one section of your homepage. It can be a different assortment on your category page. It can be all of these aspects that, again, just train the team to do it and learn from it versus thinking of this massive project that kind of stalls the entire team holistically.
So you talked about how agile your teams are right now. How much autonomy do you give your teams when it comes to experimentation, and what kind of advice do you have for folks that are leading similar teams?
Yeah, I think you have to set a standard of that it's okay if it fails, right? Perfect, the enemy of good. You have to really create this environment in which they feel like any experiment provides data, right? Because they all do. It provides us some sort of piece of information for the consumer to tell us what they like, what they don't like, how the experience tracked for them. And so you have to make sure that they all feel this moment of being able to bring that to table. I think we really think of it, especially in uncertain times, I think are the most critical opportunity for you to enable your team. I think a lot of businesses are gonna come with a defensive mentality, but I'd say in a moment like this is the moment in which you probably have the room to experiment and let your teams experiment and let them drive it. They're closest to the tools, they're closest to the day-to-day. They know kind of what they're seeing and what can work. So I think it's really important for you to kind of lean into like the exceptional intellect you have on your team, and you're going to have ideas from 300 people versus 30 people if you kind of approach it that way. But it comes with creating a safe space for them to feel like that's a moment for them to do that.
And you couple that with the voice to customer feedback. On the topic of voice to customer, how do you collect that feedback today?
Yeah.
And how do you kind of infuse that into your operating rhythm weekly, monthly?
Yeah, I think you can think of customer feedback in kind of like two sections. I think you can think of it as what you collect from the consumer, so surveys, all the typical thing you think of.
Like solicited.
Yeah, and then you can think about just like their pure behavior, right? And that data is almost more critical because the people consistently, the amount of traffic that you have on all of your digital environments is going to tell you a lot more about the consumer than them telling you kind of what they're upset about. And usually it's if like they didn't get their shoe fast enough or something of the sort. This actually tells you, if you're in the digital environment, what worked and what didn't work. And so you learning off of that, and honestly, the ability to use it dynamically is even better than you trying to like put it into like your long 8-week development process. So it's kind of like, how do you take that response from the consumer and leverage it as quick as possible?
And then as you look into the future, so if we zoom out for a second, when you are planning your digital roadmap, can you tell us a little bit about what's on the short-term digital roadmap and what you're going to be prioritizing?
Yeah.
Are you going to say the P word?
Always, personalization, right? It's kind of the key, and I think it's been a buzzword in this industry for, God, almost 10 years, right? But I think we're finally all starting to figure out how that really looks, like what that truly means.
Yeah.
So for us at Crocs, we think of personalization in kind of two buckets. We think about it as the environment in which we create for the consumer to reduce friction, get them to check out, and get them to return, right? So those are kind of like the whole landscape. And then we think about it from like the product we have, right? So Jibbitz, personalization, and that kind of all connects together. So I think you always have to think about what's the moment for the consumer. So we're really focused on A, the Jibbitz personalization experience, and then B, very much the personalization and content and how that kind of works across the entire digital ecosystem. We are a very democratic brand. We think of every consumer in different sections, and we want to be everywhere they are. So we don't kind of fuel our strategy on, they have to come .com for this. We think about where they are. So are they at TikTok? Are they on Amazon? Are they on .com? And how do we service the right experience for them in that environment? And then the other kind of component we're looking at very much is continuing our composable journey. So we're really still looking at how we do it piece by piece. So we're still very much in it. It's a long, long project to get there, and I think patience is very critical. So we're very focused there. And then I think the final piece is really with AI, right? Data is the most critical component that we all have to figure out, and we have to figure out how to get it to all of our systems quickly. And it doesn't, again, you don't have to think about it as like our website now has to have every piece of data we've ever collected in this specific format. I would think about how you get critical segments into your data, use them, and kind of think about it iteratively, right? Because in 6 weeks, it might be different than how I'm thinking about it now for 6 months, right? So it's all kind of being a little bit nimble, having that environment to change course if you need to, kind of in the process.
So you talked a little bit about how it could be different in 6 weeks, and we've talked a lot about that in the last 24 hours. I guess for my final question, I would ask, what does bold leadership look like to you, given that we're in this constant state of digital change where you really have no idea what's behind the next door that you're about to open? How do you build teams that are resilient and ready to kind of tackle it head on?
Yeah, I've touched on this a few times, but I think it's really this offensive, defensive mentality. You have to create an environment where your teams feel supported, where they feel like they're kind of in this environment where it is dynamic and it is changing all the time. And it feels a bit like whiplash sometimes for teams because they're like, well, yesterday I was focused on this and now I'm moving. And so I think really creating an environment where they feel like they have the opportunity to change the business, where they have the opportunity to bring something to the table, even if it's small. It doesn't have to be, change the entire landscape of the brand, but it changes how you're selling. It changes how you're working on process with the teams, all of that stuff, when they think about it as a opportunity versus like a negative environment where it's unknown and it's risky and it's concerning, think about it from like, this is the moment we can try stuff. This is the moment we can innovate. This is the moment we can be in a space that maybe we wouldn't have looked at in the previous instance. So I think it's just changing the mindset into something that's more opportunistic versus defensive.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. I wanted to say thank you for being here. Crocs has been an incredible brand for us to watch over the last couple of years, not just because of the fact that you guys are continuing to stay innovative in the ways that you approach digital, but also staying deeply connected to your customer.
Yeah.
For folks in the room, don't go anywhere. We have Shopify and Mattel coming up next, talking about how Mattel is reimagining digital with a composable stack and generative AI, which is a perfect continuation of this theme of building smarter, faster, and more future-ready digital experiences. Thank you, Feliz.
Yeah, thank you.